Well, good morning, friends, and welcome to Wake Up in the Word. Thanks for joining me this morning. We're going to be getting right into our devotional from the life of Joseph. So in Genesis chapter 41, grab your Bible, a cup of coffee, and join us. Let me announce also a little change I'm going to be making in format for these videos that I'm recording to YouTube, Rumble, places where they're going to just be there for a long period of time and are often pulled up and used as starters, say for your life group, your small group that meets in a home or a Sunday school class or something else. I'm not going to be sharing the personal prayer requests that I normally have been doing. Someone pointed out to me that they were pulling up some videos to use in their small group, and they were getting, because that was a year ago that I recorded that particular video. They of course had to listen to requests that were no longer contemporary, no longer relevant. As a part of the short time we have together. So I'm going to change that format a little bit, and in these particular videos I'm going to go straight into the devotional part, and I'm going to save those personal requests for the videos that of course are gone quicker, and that's on Facebook and social media of that nature. And in those areas we'll share more with personal prayer requests, while here we're just going to give you good material that you can of course perhaps pull up and use all the way down the road anytime you happen to be in one of the particular books. I keep of course a long playlist of various different groups, and you can jump into one of those playlists. Let's say you're doing that book we just finished, Colossians. Well, you can pull up the playlist and use Wake Up in the Word as a discussion starter for each one of your small groups on that. So with that in mind, we're back in the book of Genesis. We're looking at the life of Joseph. And as we look at Joseph today, yesterday we really just had left him in the dark. We looked at how 2 full years had passed. It seems like Joseph is forgotten. He's in jail and nothing is happening. Now we know during those times it may seem like nothing's happening, but something really is. Chuck Swindoll talks about how dark times, and sometimes the periods of life in which we feel like we've been maybe abandoned, are actually times in which God is fashioning us for something really great. He mentioned how he had been shaped for greatness. And listen to what he says as Swindoll brings this to bear on many other Bible characters. He said, all whom God uses greatly are first hidden in the secret of his presence, away from the pride of man. It's there that our vision clears. It's there that the silt drops from the current of our life and our faith begins to grasp his arm. Abraham waited for the birth of Isaac. Moses didn't lead the Exodus until he was 80. Elijah waited beside the brook. Noah waited 120 years for rain. Paul was hidden away for 3 years in Arabia, and the list doesn't end. You see, God is working with his people while his people are, listen, waiting. So Joseph in this waiting period is being shaped for a future significant place in God's world. The turning point after 2 full years isn't even with Joseph himself, it's with Pharaoh. A Pharaoh who didn't know God, didn't know anything about God, but God knows him, and God knows how to work his will. So it says, after 2 full years, Joseph experienced a turning point in his life on a day that seemed like any other day. The morning dawned like every other morning over the past 2 years, just like the morning that dawned before Moses saw the burning bush, just like the morning that dawned before David was anointed by Samuel as the king-elect. For Joseph, just another dungeon day, except for one little matter that Joseph knew nothing about. The night before, Pharaoh had a dream. A bad dream. Now hang on, before we get there and even read this, I want you to think about it. What's going on in the world today? What's going on in governments? It may look like darkness. It may look terrible. It may look like God has forgotten his people. But something's happening, whether you and I know it or not. Sometimes in the dreams of the leaders of the world, he is working out his will for our sake. It's amazing. Egypt was the US of A, or the Red China of their day. They were the world's superpower. The head of that superpower was a Pharaoh. What's this got to do with Joseph? Everything, although Pharaoh doesn't have a clue. Well, let's see what was happening with old Pharaoh It says that Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, and when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat. They grazed among the reeds, and after them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the river bank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt then ate up the 7 sleek fat cows. And then Pharaoh woke up. Oh my goodness. Now you had to be wondering, did I have a little too much pepperoni on my pizza last night? Something else, boy, indigestion, what caused these crazy dreams? And then he goes back to sleep in verse 5, where it says he had a second dream. And this time 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain then swallowed up the 7 healthy full heads, and then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. And what happens? Well, in the morning his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians, the wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. And what are we to think of this situation? Well, number one, we know God's busy, God's working. The only problem is, at this point, it's a mystery as to about what. The king, of course, had this dream, and this is the turning point for Joseph, although Joseph doesn't even know it yet. Swindoll says there's an interesting point about the term rendered magicians here. When that word was originally translated from the ancient Hebrew scriptures into Greek, the translators used a term that meant men versed in the sacred writings. So why mention this? Because it tells us that all these men were very intelligent for the day. They were considered the wisest men in the land. They spent their time deciphering everything from the Egyptian hieroglyphic texts to studying the movement of the stars in the heavens. But as wise as they were, they couldn't tell Pharaoh what his dream meant. Actually, I admire their honesty. They could have made something up, but they didn't. They said, "We don't know what your dream means." And then all of a sudden, the cupbearer apparently is there, and the bells start going off, the whistles, the memory, the recall happens. All of a sudden, the file opens, and he realizes that he has the answer Pharaoh needs. It says, then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants. He imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. And each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was hanged." So in verse 14, what does Pharaoh do? Well, he didn't do what some pharaohs might have if he was interrupted by the chief cupbearer. This Pharaoh was on a whim once before driven to throw the cupbearer and the baker in prison. So, he's like a lot of rulers. He holds a lot of power, wields a lot of power, and probably is a bit arrogant about it. But in verse 14, we see that Pharaoh had listened. So he sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. And that's where we're going to leave it today, but I want to leave you with this thought. When it seems like nothing's happening, that does not mean God is asleep. God has abandoned you. God has walked away. No, it means that he is working out his plan. You and I don't see it because we are finite human beings and we don't know what's going on. In the next week, you're going to see some distressing things. Well, you're already seeing distressing things happening all around the world. Should you be concerned? Well, yes. Concerned. Worried? No. We should take these things to heart with the realization that God is still at work. It may look like Satan is ruling the day, but God is at work. And he works even in the hearts and the lives of some of those that may even hate him and have nothing to do with him. God is still sovereign. He is still on the throne. He is still in control. That doesn't mean he's a controlling God, moving your will and moving things that he has allowed in the freedom of conscience and freedom of our souls. Oh, no. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about him making all of us puppets. But instead, He is busy working within the very framework he has set up. For him to be sovereign doesn't mean that he has to take away your free will, but it does mean that for the sake of his children, he is busy working even in people who may grandstand about the idea that they don't know him and don't want to know him. Some who are breaking his laws, who are trying to turn people against him. Yet they don't even know that sometimes God is busily at work in their lives. Hopefully they'll be able to realize it when people like Joseph step into Pharaoh's chamber. So friends, allow God to use you in these waiting times. Allow him to build in you the strength and the character and the courage that you need. He's going to pull some of his children into places, just as Jesus acknowledged to us in Luke chapter 21, to give testimony in these last days and to stand up and speak up for him, and perhaps even to change the very course of history. So friends, don't discount what God is doing because you and I can't see it immediately. He's busy. He's on his throne, and things are about to change. So God bless you. Thank you for spending some time with me. Trust in the Lord in these days. He'll see you through. We'll see you again right here tomorrow as we wake up in the Word.